In Middle East politics, some of the most important moves happen far from cameras and headlines. Recently, one such move took place in a top secret meeting between senior Hamas figures and a French delegation of diplomats and lawmakers in an undisclosed location. No official press conferences, no photo ops, no public statements, only quiet talks and careful silence from everyone involved. But one thing is clear. When senior Hamas leaders sit down in a top secret meeting with French lawmakers and diplomats, it is not just another quiet discussion. It is a signal that the diplomatic chessboard around Gaza and Israel is shifting in a slow motion. In fact, seen from this larger angle, the question is no longer just what was said in that secret meeting, but what sort of new geopolitical corridor is quietly opening between Europe, Hamas, in the wider Israel-Gaza war. So in today's edition of From the News Desk, we will tell you about what was actually discussed behind the closed doors between these two delegations and why is France suddenly back in the same room as Hamas even after October 7 attack. Now the gathering brought together senior figures from Hamas's political bureau and a French delegation that included current and former diplomats, as well as members of parliament from both the ruling coalition and the opposition. As per reports while quoting a Palestinian civil society source, and a faction close to Hamas described it as highly confidential and top secret, underlining how sensitive such engagements have become since October 7. As I mentioned earlier also, the meeting took place recently in an unnamed country in the Middle East, with those involved refusing to disclose the exact location, stressing that it was extremely secret. Now, according to a report by Ashraq al-Afsat, which is an Arabic international newspaper headquartered in London, several actors involved in Gaza ceasefire mediation, including Egypt, Qatar and Turkey, were informed about these very talks were happening either shortly before or soon after they began. In fact, two Hamas officials confirmed that the meeting took place but declined to say more, a sign that the Gaza-based group wanted the world to know about this very meeting, but in a tightly controlled manner. In fact, a key focus of the discussion was Palestinian internal affairs, which included reorganizing the fragmented political scenario, improving national reconciliation, and most importantly, exploring a political process to end the conflict with Israel. Now, sources mentioned in these reports say the French side also engaged on support for a Palestinian state based on the June 4, 1967 borders, which is basically the classic two-state formula that Paris has backed strongly in recent years. The talks reportedly also touched on Hamas's weapons and the future of its arsenal, with the group linking any serious discussion on disarmament to a clear political process that guarantees Palestinian self-determination and, more importantly, a sovereign state. Now, for Israel, the symbolism of this very meeting may matter as much as its content. Well, this is the first reported encounter between Hamas's leadership and European officials since the October 7 attack. At a time when Jerusalem argues that Hamas must be treated purely as a terror actor, quiet engagement by a major EU state risks weakening the narrative of total isolation. In fact, the French delegation included lawmakers from both governing camp and the opposition, suggesting that the outrage is not just a fringe experiment but spans part of the French political spectrum. In fact, this comes on top of France's broader moves, where Paris has been a leading advocate for a two-state solution and helped drive a wave of diplomatic recognition for Palestine, including its own recognition of the Palestinian state in 2025. When Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused President Emmanuel Macron of fueling anti-Semitism after this recognition, the French administration hit back, calling the comments baseless and false. Well, this was an unusually sharp public exchange between the two capitals. Now, more interestingly, France's National Anti-Terrorism Prosecutor's Office opened new investigations into alleged torture and war crimes against activists from the Global Smooth Flotilla after they were taken to the Ashdod port, following a referral from the French foreign minister. Now, seeing this entire situation unfold for Israel, the same state that is investigating its conduct now sitting down. However, discreetly with Hamas officials sends a troubling signal about the direction of European intent. If such meetings continue, Israel may fear that a gradual normalization of political contact with Hamas in parts of Europe could undercut its effort to brand the movement solely as a terrorist organization. Now, the latest encounter is not happening in a vacuum. It fits into a longer, often murky history of contact between Hamas and European leaders, including French officials. As far back as 2008, Hamas publicly said it had held discussions with European representatives, including French officials, even while the EU maintained its terrorist listing. Now, interestingly, at the same time, then Foreign Minister of France, Bernard Kouchner, acknowledged such contacts but stressed that France would not establish formal relations unless Hamas recognized Israel and denounced violence. In fact, Hamas's spokesperson at that time, Shami Abu Zuhair, said European interlocutors were trying to understand the movement's position on evolving political developments, and the persecutors from the Palestinian state indicating that Europe was already probing whether Hamas could be drawn towards a political track. In fact, in 2009, Hamas's political bureau chief Khalid Mishal met two French lawmakers in Damascus, underscoring that French parliament channels have long been used to explore engagements with Hamas. Then came 2017, when Hamas elected a new leadership under Ismail Haniyeh and issued a revised political document that accepted a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, even as it stopped short of formally recognizing Israel and insisted on the right of return and East Jerusalem as its capital. Well, the Gaza group, after 2017 proposal, then expanded its outreach to Russia, Iran, Arab and Islamic State, and even to European nations, signaling its openness to dialogue with a wider set of international actors, including in principle with the United States of America. In fact, more recently, Hamas has turned to international law firms and legal initiatives to challenge its terror designation in several European states, backed by a document signed by Moswa Abu Mazrou, arguing that Hamas is a national liberation movement that does not threaten Western countries and their interests. Remember, France itself does not list Hamas as a terrorist organization under its national law, even though it persecutes people accused of financing the group, while the European Union has kept Hamas and its military wing on its terrorism sanction list since 2001, and they have also added fresh sanctions later on. Now, seen against this very history, the secret meeting looks less like a sudden breakthrough and more like the latest episode in a long, cautious experiment. But for now, the question remains, how far can France and other Europeans go in talking to Hamas, and what price will Israel pay if those conversations quietly reshape the diplomatic map of Middle East? Well, with that, it's a wrap on today's edition of From the News Desk. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm Yash Goyal signing off for Times Now Digital. Until next time, take care and keep watching this space for more such videos.